Welcome back. We now turn back to our conversation of pronouns. Up to this point, we've been talking about pretty much just what we would call ordinary, everyday personal pronouns. But now we're going to turn to 5 other types of pronouns that guys, I just got to say this out loud. The ACT loves to ask questions about this kind of stuff. One of the reasons is because these are not rules that normally you would know unless you've specifically studied them. And as I think we've already said a few seconds ago, it's just kind of, a lot of these rules are kind of silly rules, but very important ones. We're going to start of the 5 with what we call possessive pronouns. That is to say, ever related to possession. So let's go to work with it. What are they? Well, you know them. I, mine, his, her, hers, your, yours, our, ours, their, and theirs. They indicate what we would call ownership, right? That is to say, possession. As in my truck, my house, their party, his house. They are in the possessive case, and they always answer the question whose, as in whose truck, whose house. Unlike possessive nouns, possessive pronouns are never spelled with an apostrophe. You never write H-E-R apostrophe S, T-H-E-I-R apostrophe S, Y-O-U-R apostrophe S. No. This is so you and importantly, we spell it I-T apostrophe S for it is, but we never spell it I-T-S apostrophe to show possession. No. We're going to use a possessive pronoun before a gerund. Remember these gerunds again, nouns with INGs, right? To swim versus swimming, right? Think about it this way. Here's the sample. Just listen and hear it, right? Her asking the question shows she's smart. Not she asking the question shows she's smart. Okay? Hear that one. How about this one? Mother was upset about your, not you, opening the presents too soon. And again, of course, opening is a gerund, right? We should point out, though, that not all ing nouns are gerunds, right? Sometimes just a noun, right? For example, thing, ring, spring. Other times, ing words are verbs, what we call participles. They modify pronouns in the objective case. We'll talk more about participles later. Well, watch closely. An example. I hope you don't mind my intruding on your conversation. Here, intruding is a gerund, right? That's a noun, actually, right? Well, how about this one? I hope you don't mind me intruding on your conversation. And here, intruding is a verb, what we would call a participle, okay? More about participles later when we study verbs. Just to remind, though, you don't need to understand the more silly of these rules. You just need to know how ACT will test you, right, and your knowledge of them. Here's another kind of silly pronoun rule where either way, the meaning is clear, what we call relative pronouns. These refer to other nouns, other pronouns. Which, that, who, whom, whose, what. Let's talk about the problem, as ACT will understand it, between using that and which. I would write this down in my notes now. For example, watch this example. Those are the dishes that I washed this morning. The pronoun that obviously refers to dishes, right? We use that when the subsequent words define or describe something essential to the meaning of the sentence. Those are the dishes that need to be put away. Listen to that example. Those are the dishes that need to be put away. Okay? We use which if the words that follow give information that isn't crucial to the meaning of the sentence. For example, those dishes, comma, which once belonged to my grandmother, comma, need to be put away. Now, a couple of really important things here to note. The words that came after the relative pronoun are called relative clauses. Relative pronouns introduce relative clauses, okay? This is a big deal for ACT, all right? Commas precede relative clauses starting with which, but are not used before relative clauses starting with that, okay? By the way, just so you maybe will hear this in other sources, the old school language here, restrictive clauses are that clauses, no comma. Non-restrictive clauses are which clauses, and they do use commas. Let's study some examples here. Now, the fact that I'm not doing this on a whiteboard, you write the sentence down and then you can kind of look at it again. As I said earlier in the lecture, I recommend that you create your own example here and memorize it so that you know it. For example, watch this. Quote, "The store that sold used bikes went out of business." We use that because this is essential or restrictive and important to understanding the sentence meaning. So notice, I didn't mention any commas. How about this one? "Steve's backpack, comma, which he takes to school, comma, disappeared." Now we use which here because this is, again, non-essential information. And again, the use of the commas set off the clause. The sentence, of course, would make sense without that stuff in between, right? Okay. Of course, some of this, right, could be and often is argued. Who decides what information is essential, important, and what information is not? But I would say don't worry too much about this for ACT stuff. Usually on the ACT, you'll be able to pick out the right answer from the mistake shown if you know the rules, okay? This is why you want to practice some sample ACT questions. And when you do, it's not just about getting the answers right, but understanding why the right answer is the right answer, okay? One more thing. In informal speech or writing, we have a tendency to leave out relative pronouns all the time. For example, the truck Steve drives is gone, not the truck that Steve drives is gone. You can easily leave out the word that, and the meaning is obviously clear. Or the guests we expected finally arrived. You can easily leave out the real relative pronoun, the guests whom we expected finally arrived, right? On the ACT, however, again, guys, this is formal writing, so you've got to look for the mistake of leaving out the relative pronoun. If you know what you're looking for, it's easy to see it, all right? All right, let's get to another rule. And again, sometimes this one is going to be perceived as a pretty silly or even stupid rule. You're going to get grammarians that will say, no, 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 this is really important, but let's just call it what it is. It probably is a pretty silly rule. And in fact, in some grammars, it's actually starting to no longer be a distinction that's drawn. But ACT will continue maybe to do it, so we got to learn it. And that's the who, whom distinction. Let's go ahead and study it really quickly. It's actually not that complicated of a rule, believe it or not, okay? We will use the relative pronoun who, okay, as the grammatical subject or thing of a sentence, or as a pronoun that stands for the subject. For example, who ordered the pizza? Obviously, who is the subject. For example, that, the subject, is the woman who, the subject stand-in, right, ordered it, or substitute, okay? We're going to use the relative pronoun whom following a preposition. Remember those words, anything that a squirrel can do to a log, right? In the log, through the log, to the log, around the log, etc. Or we're going to use whom when it functions as the object of the verb, action, right? For example, to whom should the truck be given, right? To is the preposition, so you know that it's going to be whom, okay? The example, the police found, there's your verb, the thief whom, there's your object of the verb, they had been seeking. Now again, this is one of those things that you just got to learn it, okay? And making your own example can be powerful, okay? I recommend it. One last point, by the way, it's a simple question. Is the pronoun performing an action, okay? And if so, then use who. If the pronoun is being acted upon, then you use whom. Also, depend on prepositions. They're always followed by whom, right? As in, with whom, in whom, before whom, around whom, between whom, and of course the famous one in letters, to whom it may concern. Finally, while it's a silly distinction, I mean, obviously, whether you use who or whom, the understanding is clear, right? No matter which word ever gets used. ACT will expect you to know the difference between these, and the rules, obviously, are that govern them, all right? Let's look at one more, maybe silly distinction. I don't know. You decide whether you think this is a silly one or not. The question of who, that, or which, okay? Write these down, okay? And then just memorize them. You're going to use who or whom to refer to people. You're going to use that to refer to things, animals, and people. but you'll use who when referring to a specific person. For example, this is Corporal Smith who fought in the war, not that fought in the war, okay? Who or that may be used for more general references, okay? For example, those are the seniors who or that skipped school. Either one, by the way, will work, all right? You're going to use which to refer to things and non-human creatures, but never to people. Write that down. You're never going to use which to refer to people, okay? So again, just to review, who for people, that for things, which for things and non-humans. Okay? And again, one more time, this is where you pick up ACT points. The only way that you could know these kind of silly distinctions is to study and learn them, all right? Which is, again, why I said in my first lecture, the ACT tests your ability to take a test, how well prepared you are, okay? All right, let's turn for a moment to another set of pronouns called reflexive pronouns, all right? So here we go. These always end with the letters S-E-L-F, self, if it's singular, and selves, if it's plural, right? Myself, for example, first person. Myself, ourselves. The second person, yourself, yourselves. The third person, herself, himself, itself, themselves, right? Listen to this example. Quote, we'll be going to the city by ourselves. The reflexive pronoun, ourselves, refers to we, the grammatical subject, right? Now, something to point out here, reflexive pronouns can't be subjects. For example, hear it wrong, and this will maybe help you out. Myself write every word of the paper. What? Now, myself wrote every word of the paper. No. Hear it correctly. I wrote every word of the paper myself, right? I, of course, the subject of the sentence. Reflexive pronouns can't be objects pronouns either. Hear it wrong. Steve gave letters to Joe and myself. No. Correctly, Steve gave letters to Joe and me. Now, I realize sometimes this gets used informally the other way, so you just have to kind of learn. All right? Our next set of pronouns are what we call interrogative pronouns. These are pretty simple for us. These are the question pronouns: what, who, which, whom, whose, when, where, why, how. What are you doing? Where are you? Who are you? Which is best? These are all examples. Whom must I ask? Remember, whom receives the action, therefore it's whom, right? Some interrogative pronouns are also relative pronouns, but when used like that, they serve obviously a different function. Okay. How about demonstrative pronouns? Let's talk about those really quickly. These are pointing pronouns. They're kind of like somebody said, like arrows pointing towards something, all right? This, these, that, those. These point to nouns, to phrases, to clauses, to whole sentences. Let's make some distinctions, though, for your notes. And ACT, again, will expect you to know this. This points to an object close by in space. This pen, this year, this idea. That points to distant objects. That star, that time, that theory. These short demonstratives are obviously, pointing to clear antecedents, right? For example, we went to the school and played games and came home very late. This bothered me. Well, obviously the question is, what bothered you, right? So be clear. Well, there you go. That's a pretty good amount of information for you on pronouns. If you're serious and you want to improve your ACT scores, I recommend the following. First, I recommend that you go back and you watch this lecture again several times, and you review your notes in this lecture right before you take the ACT. I also recommend that you go on what I call a treasure hunt, where you're looking for examples of mistakes. Hey, don't point them out to people and become that grammarian snob, but at least try and hear and see them. For example, every time you hear somebody say everyone got their chance, just think to yourself, yeah, that's not formally correct because everyone is singular and there is plural, right? Look for examples, however, when people do it right. A lot of times you're going to know that they've been well educated, and obviously you want to be one of those people when you need to be, right? Finally, I would say own these rules, right? And you will write a higher ACT score, no question. We've been talking a lot about the grammar usage section of the ACT, but I would just point out here that when you have to write your essay for the ACT, knowing these rules, understanding how to use these rules in your writing, will make a much, much stronger impression on the readers for ACT, right? So, we finished with the first part of a sentence, something, right? Nouns and pronouns. Now it's time to turn to the doing something part, that is to say what we call the verb. I'll see you back for lecture 5 here in a little bit. Thank you.